Thank you. When I'm introduced as a former Conservative MEP, I often stress that the former applies to both halves of that description. I'm certainly not here as an advocate or spokesperson for the Conservative Party, quite the contrary. I've noticed that some of the speakers have had the very pleasant habit of introducing their remarks with one or two words of the Irish. I'm afraid I can't do that, but it did remind me of a story about Ronald Reagan, who on one occasion was speaking in New Mexico and gave what he thought was a rather good speech. He got very little reaction from the audience and in a rather sulky way sat down. He was succeeded by the local senator who got up and spoke and got a very good round of applause indeed. Everyone loved him. Since he was speaking in Spanish, Ronald Reagan couldn't understand him and sat there sulking, but eventually he thought, well, I ought to join in the applause. I can't just be so huffy. And he started applauding. There was a silence that descended on the room. He turned to Nancy and said, well, what's happened? You fool, she said, you fool, you're applauding a translation of the speech you've just given. I don't know if anything like that's going to happen today, but I hope not. Pat Cox rightly said that on such an occasion, there's a little bit of latitude given to how people interpret the title that's been given them. I'm going to interpret the title slightly differently from the way in which the previous speaker did, because it's my own view that everything about Brexit is entirely unclear, including whether it's going to happen. And I'll come back to that in a moment. And even if it does happen, how long it lasts for, which is another issue as well. I think it won't be possible really to answer questions about future relations in and between these islands until we know what kind of Brexit we're talking about, when it happens, and in what circumstances. Everything relating to Brexit at the moment is a complete mess. And I think that has, in a paradoxical way, positive as well as negative aspects to it. My main initial point I want to make is that I find it impossible to believe that this Conservative government can ever come to a withdrawal agreement with the European Union on the subject of Brexit. Because the Conservative Party in particular is today an instrument of little more than radical Euroscepticism. When people talk about the ERG, the European Research Group, and Rees-Mogg, there's sometimes a suggestion that they're a fringe, that they're a marginal part of the Conservative Party. That isn't so. They're not the tail that wags the dog. They are the dog. Those people in the House of Commons, like Ken Clarke, like Dominic Grieve, like Anna Soubry, who speak out against Brexit, and it's noticeable that they very rarely speak out against Brexit qua Brexit. They urge a softer form of Brexit. The argument about Brexit within the Conservative Party has almost entirely been won by the most radical form of Euroscepticism. I remember a couple of years ago I was standing in the European elections. I deserve an entry in the Guinness Book of Records for having stood for most parties for the European elections in the United Kingdom, and certainly a record of having lost under more party hats than most other people. But I was on one of these forays. I bumped into a former Conservative colleague of mine, and I asked him, I know you won't be voting for me, but will you be voting in the European election? Oh no, he said, I don't vote in the European elections, it's got absolutely no power. I gave him 5 minutes of the Donnelly eloquence, and at the end of it he said, well, that's very interesting. Obviously it has more power than I realised. Does that mean you're going to vote? Oh no, he said, it's obviously got much too much power and I don't want to encourage it. But that hostility, which is, I think it's not unfair to describe as visceral, is widely to be seen within the Conservative Party. There was an interesting distinction that the Commissioner made between whether a deal or withdrawal agreement can be negotiated or whether it can be taken to the House of Commons with some prospect of being accepted. I think, with respect to the Commissioner, that that's a false distinction. I think that Mrs May will not be able to get to the position of having negotiated a treaty which will then be put to the House of Commons. I think there is so much constraint upon her now from the most radical Eurosceptic elements within her own party that she won't be able to agree anything. There was hope after the white paper was publicized, that you could read between the lines that there was more to come. I'm afraid that is not the way I see it. I think that the moment the White Paper, with all its equivocations and evasions, was published, it seemed to go much too far in the wrong direction to many people in the Conservative Party. I think the idea that she is preparing the ground for a more realistic approach to the future of Brexit is not persuasive. It's sometimes said that the British have never been clear about what they wanted. That's quite wrong. The British government has always been clear about what it wanted. It wanted the maximum amount of benefit of being in the European Union and the minimum amount of responsibilities for being in the European Union. The problem is that that's not possible. The problem is not that the British don't know what they want. The problem is that they haven't until now come forward with any realistic approach to that, making that happen. And it's my contention that that can't happen. Now, this has a particular sad and tragic, possibly tragic, implication for Ireland. Because in my view, the question of Ireland and the relationship between the United Kingdom and Ireland is a particular casualty of Brexit, in the sense that when people talk about the economic damage that will accrue to the European Union or to the United Kingdom arising from a no-deal Brexit, what they always rightly say is that in the aggregate, much more damage will be done to the United Kingdom than will be done to the European Union. But that's not entirely true of Ireland, because a great deal of the damage that will be done to the European Union will be done to Ireland, both economically and perhaps, as importantly, politically. I've talked about the divisions within the Conservative Party that, in my view, make it impossible for there to be a withdrawal deal. I think there's a philosophical complement to it as well, which is the wider question, what is the point of Brexit? Can Brexit be made to work? In my view, it can't, because you have the insoluble dilemma. Are you going to have an economically ruinous Brexit, which would arise from the maximum amount of change from where we are now? Or are you going to do what Mrs May seemed to be inclined to be trying within the White Paper, maintain as much as possible of the existing arrangements, but with the position that the United Kingdom is a rule taker rather than a rule maker? One proposal, a soft Brexit if you like, makes no political sense, because what is the point of leaving the European Union if you're simply going to be bound by all its rules? On the other hand, the politically sensible proposal, if you like, we're going to change the sovereignty relationship, has the enormously damaging economic implication. And so therefore, the Conservative Party, or any party that was trying to make sense of Brexit, has always got to be rattling around these two peas in a box. Are we going to go for the economically damaging or the politically unsustainable option? And they haven't been able to make up their mind, because there is no good answer to that question. Now, I'm not at all convinced that the House of Commons will be able to prevent the United Kingdom from leaving the European Union with no deal. There is a majority within the House of Commons, certainly, against such a chaotic outcome. But the particular configuration of British politics at the moment makes it perhaps impossible for that majority to be mobilised in a way that prevents no-deal Brexit. I listened with great interest to what Brendan had to say, the other Brendan had to say a few minutes ago. I came to the conclusion that you shouldn't appear on the same stage as Animals, Children or Brendan Halligan, because they'll act you off the stage. And he anticipated very well some of the things that I wanted to say. I agree profoundly with Brendan about the necessity for political parties, which are often regarded as an unwanted excrescence of the democratic experience. Far from it, they're central. But when they are wrongly configured, then that is an enormous element of dysfunctionality within the body politic. And I'm afraid that our political parties in the United Kingdom are misconfigured at the moment. The question is, will the British political system be able, when confronted with the possibility, the growing possibility of a no-deal Brexit, to be able to pull itself together, to reconfigure itself in such a way that the effective majority in the House of Commons can stop a no-deal Brexit occurring? I'm not at all sure it can. I think it's entirely possible that there will be a no-deal Brexit in March 2019, and I think that the next stage of that may well be chaos, it may well be a national government, it may well then be the reconfiguration of the British political parties that, in my view, in a rational world, would have happened before the no-deal Brexit occurred. I would like to finish on an optimistic note, because what I've said is not all negative at all. I'm quite convinced that when in 10 years' time I come back to, what will it be, the 48th of such summer schools, Britain, the United Kingdom, will be in the European Union. And Britain's relationship with Ireland will be greatly helped and nourished by that fact. The only thing I don't know is whether we're going to leave and come back or never leave in the first place. Those who live longest will know most. Henry James once said that the lesson of history is that the future will resemble the past, except to the extent that it differs. I think that's a good motto to be finishing on. Thank you for your attention.